Justice Winograd here, going to talk about the current state of the Supreme Court and why it's broken. Now, I want to give you a little history. After Marbury v. Madison, getting into the Supreme Court was not that tough, as long as the president nominated you. President nominates, there really weren't many rejections. And you had votes like 99-1, or just by acclamation. Or I think the furthest one I saw was like 72-28, until my second childhood memory. See? I know something made this go crazy. My first childhood memory, just for the sake of completion, was the Bush-Dukakis election. My second memory as a human being was the Clarence Thomas hearings, because the Constitution says that the president chooses the Supreme Court justices who have lifetime tenure in time of good behavior, and the Senate has to confirm. Let's actually see how it's worded. I don't want to give you bad information. There's Marbury and Madison. Article: how does one become a Supreme Court justice? Okay. Pretty simple. Okay. They're nominated by the president. And then Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 of the Constitution states that the president shall nominate, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint justices to the Supreme Court. Keep in mind, no other court is mentioned in the Constitution. Those have all been created by Congress. Can't get that through your head. So why is it broken? Well, as I described earlier, the fact that the votes were so far away from each other, and if someone got nominated by a president, they were just about guaranteed in, ended with Clarence Thomas. And I'm going to take a little break here. Thank you. If you know, you know. Clarence Thomas, I would say, was the first controversial Supreme Court nominee to make it on the Supreme Court. Was he controversial at the beginning? No. He was controversial when a clerk of his named Anita Hill made allegations of what is that? Of sexual impropriety against him. Oh, we're back. Okay, sorry about that. I mean, that was happening all day today. It was so annoying. Okay, so Clarence Thomas. Now, I'm not here to talk about the sexual allegations. He was confirmed 52 to 48. I mean, you can get closer than that, but not really. And he's on the Supreme Court today, because I'm here to talk about today's Supreme Court. And he's pretty dirty. Now, I'm curious if anyone here is familiar with the name Harlan Crow. Being no one's in the room, I'm gonna put in the chat Harlan Crow. Haha. Cool. Okay. So, you know how whenever you're describing a bad guy and you just say they, you're pretty much talking about Harlan Crow. He is a collector of Nazi paraphernalia signed by Hitler. Like, he wants stuff that Hitler had. He's a billionaire. And he is BFFs with old Clarence. Now, it's a rule of the Supreme Court that any gifts are to be reported. Unless they're small gifts. Small gifts. Like, a Coke. Now, over the years, this is what Harlan Crow has given to Clarence Thomas. He paid for his food and his lodging during a one-day trip to Indonesia in 2019. A 19,000 pound statue of one of Jeannie Thomas's favorite religious figures. That must have been worded wrong, but it's a gift. Huh? He also, Harlan Crow, hired Jeannie Thomas at $500,000 a year after an additional $500,000 as a signing bonus. Jeannie Thomas is Clarence Thomas's wife. A job at the Liberty Consulting Firm, establishing conservative connections and lobbying the court. Clarence Thomas has been on his plane many times. Everyone talks about Epstein's plane. How about Harlan Crow's plane? Harlan Crow has had at least 4 cases that can be directly tied to the Supreme Court. Like, a case was heard and the verdict would definitely affect him. Don't you think maybe Clarence Thomas should have, that's the word I'm looking for, recused himself? Okay, moving on. Gorsuch shouldn't have even been there, but I'm going to get to that. He had a piece of land in Colorado, which he was trying to sell for nearly 2 years. It was just draining his wallet. Well, 8 days after he became a Supreme Court justice, it sold. And 9 days after that, the buyers were in front of the Supreme Court. I'm not making this up. Let's talk about Alito. Alito, at his home, had an upside down flag, which is symbolic of distress, U.S. military distress. It was flown on January 6th. It was un-American. But he blamed it on his wife. I guess in that case, women can do what they want with their bodies. And I'll even say Justice Jackson received a $900,000 gift from an anonymous source. So I can go liberal judge too. Basically, they were accepting all this stuff. It was raining all over the Supreme Court. And how can that be right? How can that be fair? The Supreme Court was meant to be a non-political body. That's why Alexander Hamilton wanted it to be the weakest branch of government. You know, weakest? That's not equal. But now it seems to be the most important one. Now I want to tell you how these justices came. Now I'm just going to tell you a personal story. When I was in law school, Sandra Day O'Connor resigned to take care of her husband who had Alzheimer's. After she resigned, President George W. Bush appointed John Roberts to take her place. Fine. About a week later, Chief Justice William Rehnquist died. Which means George Bush got to appoint the Chief Justice. So he had to withdraw. Roberts from consideration for the Associate Justice seat and resubmit him. Resubmit to be the Chief Justice. And if there's one person I am disappointed in, it's John Roberts. And I'll tell you why soon. Then George W. Bush appointed Harriet Miers, who was the Solicitor General of his administration, who was, I mean, there's no actual qualifications, but if there were, she didn't meet them. Like, the Senate wasn't going to approve her. They just weren't. So she had to she withdrew her own nomination, and then George W. Bush appointed Samuel Alito, he became a justice by a very close vote. Now, I tell you that to say if William Rehnquist would have held on through Robert's confirmation, we could have a Chief Justice Myers or a Chief Justice Alito. Funny how things happen, right? Just saying. History has a funny way. But, okay, so they accepted bribes. All politicians accept bribes. They're not supposed to be politicians, though. They're supposed to be above the law. No, I didn't mean above the law. They're supposed to be the ones who interpret and tell you what the law and Constitution mandate because of Marbury v. Madison. Now, there was this issue called Watergate in the 70s, and where President Richard Nixon resigned. I'm not going to go over all Watergate, but he later said in an interview with David Frost that if the president does it, it's not illegal. And no one bought that. But no one really listened to him because he wasn't president anymore. However, that all changed this week. In what I believe to be the worst decision since Citizens United in 2010, the court said that the president does have criminal immunity under certain circumstances. Of course, they don't define those circumstances, nor do they define how to define those circumstances. What they did was the Supreme Court has become so political now that this was the last case that was decided. They waited as long as they could. And then they had to say something. And they came up with probably the worst decision possible by saying okay, I want to word it well to you, so I'm taking this off of PBS. Thank you, PBS. Okay. The heart of Trump versus United States was a legally untested question that has not come before the court until now. Because Nixon resigned before it could, whether a president could be immune from criminal prosecution for official acts while in office. Writing the majority opinion, Chief Justice Roberts, and this is why I am very disappointed with Roberts. He was actually gaining on me for a little while. He wrote, and this is a direct quote, "The president enjoys no immunity for his unofficial acts, and not everything the president does is official. The president is not above the law." Well, that sounds great. End it there. End it there. End it there. Hand it in. Boom. But there's more. The system of separated powers designed by the framers has always demanded an energetic, I wonder if that was a dig at Biden, I don't know, independent executive. The president, therefore, may not be prosecuted for exercising his core constitutional powers, and he is entitled, at a minimum, here we go, to a presumptive immunity from prosecution for all official acts. Okay. So if it's an official act, he cannot be prosecuted. But how do you say what's an official act or not? There's no body to determine whether or not something's an official act. See what I'm getting at here? Like when Trump told Pence to blatantly break the law and accept these fake electors, is every conversation between the president and the vice president an official act? Or is it not, because he was asking him to do something illegal and that just can't be done and not within the presidency? So now this case, this is why they waited so long, is going to go back to the trial courts. And the trial court, only in this situation, will determine if Trump's trying to overthrow the government and overthrow democracy was an official act. And they're running out the clock, is what they're doing. They're running out the clock until the election, because they assume Trump's going to win. I'm just reading more of this, and it's again to me. Robert said, Trump asserts a far broader immunity than the limited one the court recognizes. Huh? Who determines what's an official act? Granted, in the Trump case, they've thrown it back to the trial court. Is that going to be precedent now? I don't know. And there was one little hero in this. Surprised me. Someone who's actually impressed me. And that's Amy Coney Barrett. Now, she was with the majority, but not totally. She said, we're going a little too far here, guys. And she wrote, to constitute in a concurrence, although she was technically disagreeing, the Constitution does not require blinding juries to the circumstances surrounding conduct for which presidents can be held liable. And that rules around evidence already exist to handle concerns about prejudicing the jury in a case-by-case basis. Sounds like a dissent. She's basically saying, we got to establish something here, guys. Yeah, fine, presidential immunity. But how can we have presidential immunity and no one to determine it? She broadly agreed with the majority that they have some level of immunity, but she said that the decision wasn't specific enough. Now, I wish she voted the other way, but I'll take her concurrence, which will hopefully be used as dicta sometime, and eventually this will be overruled. Because right now, the president can do anything. Anything. And say it's an official act. This takes power away from the people and into the hands of one person. This decision and the timing of it, they boggle my mind. The court's broken. You have Clarence Thomas accepting bribes left and right. His wife was actually driving January 6th terrorists, yes, terrorists, to the Capitol. You have Alito, flag upside down. You had the whole Kavanaugh debacle. Although judicially, Kavanaugh's been better than I expected. And Roberts, the one who I expected, who I had so much hope for, because he was against the Dobbs decision originally. That's why Alito leaked it. Just crapped all over it. Now, can the court be changed? Yeah, of course. Some ways would take a constitutional amendment. Not going to happen. We are not going to be able to get term limits. We're not going to be able to move beyond lifetime tenure. But if you read, it's so vague. It says establishes a Supreme Court, and the only individual it lists is a Chief Justice. So, who's to say that the justices don't just keep circulating? Federal court, Supreme Court, Federal Court, Supreme Court, Supreme Court. I don't see anything wrong with that. Unconstitutional. A lot of people like to talk about packing the court, just adding more people. I don't like that idea, because then whenever we have a new administration with a new political party, we're just going to have a bigger court. And eventually, Yankee Stadium won't even be able to fill up the Supreme Court. We could strip the court's jurisdiction to hear challenges to specific or all federal laws and regulations. We could reverse Marbury. It's not going to happen, but we could require a supermajority or unanimity to strike down a law, or, in effect, make a law. Because that's what they did without really making a law. The court's broken. And I love the law. I love studying it. I love researching it. I love the history of it. And it saddens me that it's broken right now. And how are justices mainly found now? Do you think Trump knew who Neil Gorsuch was? No. There's an organization called the Federalist Society, which is a very conservative organization, which the top of the top of the top conservatives, lawyers who want to become judges join and try to climb the ranks. Not to mention that Alito, Roberts, Gorsuch. What am I missing? Not Thomas. He wasn't asked that. Oh, Barrett. We're all asked if the issue of abortion comes before the court, how would you rule? And they all said, we cannot comment on an issue that may come in front of the court. Stop that shit right now. Stop it. Stop it. Don't let them not answer questions. Also, advise and consent to the Senate doesn't necessarily mean 50%. We can, do a little wordplay there, but make them answer the questions. Dear Lord. And now another reason why it's broken. And I'm going to wrap up with this. 3 justices there are Donald Trump appointees. And he should only have 1, maybe 2. When Justice Antonin Scalia died, President Barack Obama appointed Merrick Garland, a.k.a. the weakest attorney general I've ever seen, to the Supreme Court. Mitch McConnell, who was the Senate Majority Leader, he just held it up. He said, we're not going to have a hearing. And then Trump got elected. He didn't even give him the opportunity for a hearing. He held him up for, 16 months? 16 months. There was 8 people on the Supreme Court, on the chance that Trump would win. And he did. Then Trump appointed Kavanaugh. That appointment, while controversial, Trump did have the right to make. But then they pulled the absolute opposite. Right before the 2020 election, Ruth Bader Ginsburg dies. And they move so fast to get Amy Coney Barrett confirmed. 16 months after Scalia died, was like 20 days after Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, they played both sides of the fence. This isn't working. I'm scared of the direction the court's going to take us. I was hopeful that Roberts was sane, but reading his decision in this Trump presidential immunity case, basically the president can do anything now and say it was an official act. It's scary. Republican or Democratic president. And now I'm going to give you one last piece of evidence to prove to you that Trump is not an actual Republican. That he's just pretending. He just saw a party that was weaker. Trump knew he lost the night of the election. Let's not hem and haw about it. He knew he lost. But instead, he wanted to do all these court battles and all this, lose 63 times. If he was a real Republican, he would have convinced Clarence Thomas to step down and appoint a 35-year-old version of Clarence Thomas. Because in this next 4 years, there's a potential we could have 3 seats open. Alito is getting older. Pretty sure he will definitely resign if Trump wins. I don't wish death on anybody, but it's a possibility. Thomas, same logic as Alito. And Sonia Sotomayor will definitely resign if Biden wins, but she's also not in the best of health. I don't know what the court's going to look like in 4 years. But this is the Roberts Court, and I was supportive of the Roberts Court. Not after this one. Not after this decision, which he wrote. So, that's my ramble about the Supreme Court. Maybe someone will watch this, maybe someone won't. If you do, Clarence Thomas. Someone has to get that.